would request Dr. P. Kulhara to kindly present the memento to Dr. Preeti Arun ma'am. Next, I would request Dr. Adarsh Kohli ma'am to kindly felicitate the chairpersons, Dr. Kulhara and Ritu Nehra ma'am, with the mementos. So now, we are thrilled to start the second session, which will be delivered by our keynote speaker, Dr. Shekhar Seshadri. Sir will enlighten us on the topic, Impact of Child Abuse on Child and Family. And for this, I would like to invite Professor Shubmohan sir and Dr. Lalit Kumar to chair the session. Dr. Shubmohan sir is a professor in our department and sir has multiple scientific papers and laurels to be credited. Dr. Lalit Kumar is an assistant professor of psychology and sir has a number of publications to his credit. I would request the chairperson to introduce the speaker as well as the topic. Over to you, sir.
Good morning all. It's my pleasant privilege to introduce Professor Seshadri. He's one of my favorite persons in Indian psychiatry because he's a great speaker. Many times I feel the way he speaks is more fun than what he says, but what he says is also important. So I would request all of you not to get carried away by his diction and his voice and his other stuff, and pay attention to what he says as well. As you can see on the slide, he's been there for a very long time. He has more than 35 years of experience in child mental health. He's been involved in almost everything that is there to do with the field of child mental health. I mean, there's simply too much in a CV to talk about, so I'll not go into that and waste more time. I just hope that it is useful for all of you. And usually his talks are very, very rich, and there's a lot to gain from whatever he says. So, sir, I would request you to take it away, and there's some technical glitch, I guess. So, yeah. Are we ready, sir?
Yeah, I'll manage. Preeti, thank you very much for that robust and solid framework. The idea, though I will kind of seg you into the whole world of sexual abuse and look at some of the systemic issues that have been raised, and I understand that this is a heterogeneous audience. Scholars of psychology, only scholars of psychology, and when I mean scholars, I am also a scholar of psychology. Some university, sir, आपकी यूनिवर्सिटी से छात्र जो आए हैं, तो हाथ तो ही ना, scholars of psychology. नहीं देखिए, प्रीति ने जब emotional abuse की बात की, we look at it in a particular sense of let's understand as scholars of psychology or even thinking members of civil society कि ये actually how does it play out, और हमें sensitization अगर करना है तो वो किस तरीके से करें. तो बात ये है कि there is a student, okay, a child, and the child is walking by and there is this teacher here. The child looks at the teacher, face lights up, and the child says, "Good morning, teacher." Okay, good morning, teacher. And the teacher is, okay, right? It's a 1 second gesture that took place. Now, what are you doing to the child? Is he angry with me? Did I do something to upset him? Will he continue to be angry? Will he not talk to me anymore? So, when we speak of adult-child interactions and to look at the kind of impact, let's expand it a little more. So, child has a report card, and the child comes to the parent and gives the report card. And Papa looks at the report card, looks at the child, looks at the report card, looks at the child, looks at the report card, looks at the child, and does. Nothing is said. Nothing is said, but a lot is conveyed. Or or उससे नहीं सुधरोगे, या तुझे नालायक हो, या तेरे जैसे बच्चे पैदा क्यों होते हैं? My friends, this is emotional abuse. Let's understand what emotional abuse means then. And it would surprise you to know, or perhaps it wouldn't. Thank you very much. Or better still. So how emotional abuse then translates into physical abuse then. And what does that do then? 90% of people who attempt suicide have at some point of time have heard at some point of time in their lives a feedback that devalued them. And when push comes to shove, they say, anyway हमें कहा गया था कि हम किसी चीज के लायक नहीं हैं, क्या फर्क पड़ता है मुझे या don't put out the lights. वहाँ का बंद कर दीजिए, यहाँ का रहने दीजिए. हाँ बस ये चलेगा. बहुत कॉमन ही यादें जो है उसको ब्लॉक आउट करना, खास करके अत्याचार या शोषण थोड़ा एक्सट्रीम हो और बाद में फ्लैशबैक्स आते हैं. हम जब PTSD की बात करते हैं. And when we try to disclose to someone and it is trivialized, as it happens very often, it is very detrimental to what it does. So when we speak of mental health impact of any form of abuse, और जब हम emotional abuse or physical abuse की बात करते हैं, and I'm going to allude to two very important issues that Preeti raised to make this point in even more detail. These are attachment injuries. अब हम psychology में मेरी एम्सवर्थ जॉन बॉल्बी को पढ़ते हैं, प्याजे पढ़ते हैं, विगोट्स्की और कोलबर्ग इतना नहीं पढ़ते हैं जितना पढ़ना चाहिए. Attachment as a concept, attachment as a theory, attachment as a method, as an approach, and attachment as a method. The concept is that attachment is important for optimal human child development. That's the concept. The theory is that there is secure attachment and insecure attachment, and insecure attachments can give rise to either withdrawal or protest reactions. The approach is for a counselor, a helper, to deliberately establish an emotionally corrective relationship with a child. What is the method? How do you actually do it? how do you make these corrections to the attachment injuries that take place? दो चीजें मैं कहना चाहता हूँ to draw your attention to the point that Preeti made about risk and protective factors की जब मैम बात कर रही थी. 2015 में जब JJ एक्ट चेंज हुआ निर्भया कांड के बाद और ऐसा कहा जाता था कि 17 साल का जो किशोर था उस कांड में that his behavior was the cruelest of the Lord. क्या ये सत्य है? और ये अब साबित हो चुका है कि ये सत्य नहीं है. This was a trial by media that क्या वो दिल्ली से 80 किलोमीटर दूर रहता था? He had one mentally ill, untreated, dysfunctional parent. क्या ये सत्य है? क्या वो स्कूल जाता था? He had a learning disability. He was hit by the teacher. He dropped out of school. Is that the truth? That he moved to Delhi to support a family consisting of a dysfunctional parent and 2 younger sisters, was in regular contact with the family till 4 months before the Nirbhaya episode, earning money by cleaning tables in a roadside eatery and sending money home regularly. Is that the truth? That 4 months before the Nirbhaya episode, he lost contact with the family, was befriended by these guys who ran the transport business, and somewhere, let's say, the perversion of his soul took place. Is that the truth? Sir, जब system की बात करते हैं, the Juvenile Justice Act has 2 components: children in conflict with law and children in need of care and protection. मेरा सवाल आपसे ये है, where was the JJ Act when this child was in need of care and protection? Every child in conflict with law was and continues to be a child in need of care and protection. No one is a born, पैदाइशी criminal. मुंह देखिए इसका. इस तरह से जो बातें करते हैं. There is no such thing as a born criminal there. और जो vulnerabilities और ACEs की बात डॉक्टर प्रीति अरुण ने करी है, if COVID is a current pandemic, ACEs has been an everlasting epidemic. Remember what Vivek Lal said. He spoke from a position of distress. Your director, he spoke from a position of distress. He said, क्या ये endemic हो रहा है? The other point that Preeti made, and I want you to register this, that देखिए हम जब community programs की बात करते हैं और safety की बात करते हैं, one component of that is the stranger issue that Preeti spoke about. But कठोर सत्य ये है, 75% abuse occurs with people who are known and familiar. They are not strangers. And I will allude to that in the second part of the presentation I make after this one is over. But let me continue on this thesis. मैंने suicidality की बात की because हम जब mental health impact के बारे में सोचते हैं और there is a difference between an individual who says that I am in a difficult situation. मैं कठिन परिस्थिति में हूँ. मेरी कठिन परिस्थिति असहनीय है. मैं जीना नहीं चाहता, मैं मरना चाहता हूँ, मैं अपने आप को मारना चाहता हूँ. I am in a difficult situation. My difficult situation is intolerable. I do not wish to live. I wish to die and I wish to kill myself. They are not the same. They are not the same. They are a spectrum of phenomenological contexts in the path to suicidality. तो करीब 15-20 साल पहले मेरे पास एक किसी ने किताब भेजा, बुक रिव्यू की, written by Robert Firestone, and the book was called Combating Self-Destructive Thoughts, Separation Theory and Voice Therapy. मैंने सोचा कुछ होगा यार, some fluff, because who writes, what is separation theory and voice therapy, that it must be some fluff. That it's one of the most powerful books that I have read on the whole notion of the inner voice. जिसके साथ अत्याचार होता है, जिसके साथ शोषण होता है, उनकी अंतर्ध्वनि क्या है? I also recognize and acknowledge the presence of an honored guest here, the only child in our presence. We are very privileged. You can tell her later that we are very privileged. Thank you. ये इसके 3 लेवल्स हैं. कुछ सोच विचार ऐसे हैं जिससे आत्मसम्मान जो है या इनवर्ट इज अ सेल्फ डिफीटिंग. नाउ लुक एट द कंटेंट ऑफ दीज वॉइस स्टेटमेंट्स एंड लुक एट द कॉन्टेक्स्ट दैट डिफाइंस इट. सो इफ यू लुक एट सेल्फ डेप्रिकेटिंग थॉट्स ऑफ एवरीडे लाइफ, तो उसकी अंतर्ध्वनि ये है कि यू आर इनकॉम्पिटेंट, यू आर स्टूपिड, यू आर नॉट अट्रैक्टिव, यू आर गोइंग टू मेक अ फूल ऑफ योरसेल्फ. Or you go to the last level, which is vicious self-abusive thoughts and accusations accompanied by angry affect. You idiot, you bitch, you creep, you stupid shit, you don't deserve anything, you're worthless. 2 thoughts that support the cycle of addiction. जब हम adult outcomes of child sexual abuse की बात करते हैं, there are childhood outcomes. And they could be anything, a child who's refusing to come to school, or a child who's just going to a pediatrician with repeated episodes of UTI. Because when the kid was 4 years old and has a mother who is distant, and a father who is neglectful, and there is a domestic help at home, a man with suspect hygiene, who keeps handling her in the genital area, and goes to the pediatrician with UTI, given antibiotics, recovers, then the UTI recurs again, and this goes on for 10 years till this perpetrator in question goes away somewhere else, and at the age of 16, this repeated UTI basically escalates into nephritis, and the person in question ends up with a nephrectomy. And when I worked with this adult, she told me that organ loss is a very heavy price to pay for CSA. Losing a kidney, I mean, which is not to say that we don't hear of rape, murder, and what I'm saying is that CSA is a can of worms, and it's a difficult area to work in. It's a complex area, as Preeti pointed out. But आप जो कह रहे थे सर कि एक तरह से कम्युनिटी एक्शन हो और निधि का इस गोष्ठी का प्रयोजन करना, निधि और अखिलेश और इस डिपार्टमेंट का उद्देश्य ये है कि हम लोग एकीकृत होके ट्राई सिटी एरिया हो या चंडीगढ़ में ही हो, कुछ ऐसी चीजें करें which is planned and systemic to basically address this issue. और फिर ये बात आगे बढ़ती है जिसमें ultimately self harm वाली बात होती है, which contributes to self of hopelessness, कि देखो कहाँ ले आए हो तुम अपनी फैमिली को, अच्छा यही होगा कि अपने आप to injunctions to carry out, which is बहुत सोच ले इसके बारे में, अब कर ही डालो. So the idea in the whole issue of mental health impact is not to make a clinical diagnosis of PTSD and prescribe SSRIs or benzodiazepines. There is much more nuanced work to be done there. और खास करके हम जब systems की बात करते हैं और एक concept inaugural में भी हुआ, इसका जिक्र हुआ था when people spoke about multidisciplinary, बट एक कॉन्सेप्ट ये भी है जिसको हम ट्रांसडिसिप्लिनरी कहते हैं, और इस पे मैं थोड़ा इससे जुड़ी हुई जो भी संकल्पनाएं हैं I'd like to share with you. It is not enough for a mental health professional to diagnose PTSD in an individual with trauma. You have to assist that child through the secondary victimization and re-traumatization that occurs in judicial and police processes. और ये process है क्या? How does CSA come to be known? Child is referred to Nidhi by Child Welfare Committee, already established, FIR फाइल हो चुका है, ये एक तरह का context है. But a child comes to Nidhi with school refusal, or recent onset of bedwetting, or cutting behaviors, or dissociation, and discloses that this is what has happened. And under the guidelines of POCSO, there is something known as mandatory reporting. And then an FIR is lodged. And under CRPC, an investigative officer of no less than the rank of an SI takes a statement under section 161. Then a statement is taken under section 164. Then the charge sheet is filed, the charges are framed, then the date is fixed, and then the trial, direct, cross, expert witnesses, witness 1, witness 2. Then there is argument, and then there is acquittal or judgment, and if found guilty, sentencing. So this is the process that takes place there. अब इस प्रोसेस में एक मानसिक विशेषज्ञ जो है उनका पात्र क्या है, and at any point of time there is trauma that is taking place. Let me expand on this theme even a bit more. One child is abused once by one person, known or unknown, और आप एविडेंस गैदर कर रहे हैं या मदद करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, ये एक तरह का प्रकरण है. When the Tata Institute of Social Sciences was tasked with conducting a social audit of state-run childcare institutions and submitted a report of institutional abuse that was taking place across country, particularly in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. I refer particularly to the Muzaffarpur case. The Supreme Court took the case away from Bihar police and handed it over to CBI. And the Supreme Court instructed us to assist the investigative officer in evidence gathering. 47 girls systematically abused over a 3-year period by multiple people known and unknown. आप किस इंसिडेंट की एविडेंस ले रहे हैं? And the girls told us कि आप किसकी बात कर रहे हैं? अच्छा उसकी उसने तो 50 बार या 3 साल में मैं किस चीज की बात करूं? ये तो 200-300 बार मेरे साथ ऐसा हुआ है. 5 of those girls had severe mental illness. 6 of them had hearing and speech deficit, and another 9 or so had intellectual disability, ranging from moderate to severe. Only 22 girls were found capable of giving evidence. We filed a 150-page report that was, we submitted a 150-page report that was filed along with the charge sheet. And the trial was shifted from Patna to the special court in Saket in Delhi. And the girls were shifted from Patna to Delhi in a bus with an armed escort at either end because of the sensitivity of the case. They could, of course, not be flown because it's very difficult. And they were very difficult. And I was a prosecution witness. My direct and my cross lasted 3 days because there were 22 accused and 20 defense lawyers. The judgment came in December of 2019 and the sentencing in Jan of 2020, just before the pandemic. 11 people were sentenced to life for the rest of their life, including the main accused, Brajesh Thakur. 8 of them, friends, were women. 8 of them were women who sexualized these girls, pinned them down, beat the hell out of them, and the public prosecutor actually asked for death sentence for the main accused. But death sentence is a very contentious issue. Delhi mein, in fact, at the National Law University, Professor Surendranath runs a project called Project 39A. Project 39A is essentially a project against the death penalty. I mean, it's a question I can put to any of you, are you for or against the death penalty? Let me make my position very clear. I am against death penalty because I believe ideologically that the state has no right to take a person's life, no matter what the nature of the crime may be. The criminal justice system has enough provision through processes of rehabilitation, reformation, and restoration, rather than this premise of retributive justice. This is the principle of community psychology enshrined in the evocative work of Reverend Desmond Tutu in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in post-apartheid South Africa. So please read about Reverend Desmond Tutu's Reconciliation Commission. Also, the community psychology में healing किस तरीके से होती है. Transdisciplinary. A mental health professional needs to know all this stuff. How does it play out? Similarly, it's not enough for a judge to listen to testimony and adjudicate. Who's the child? 9-year-old with moderate intellectual disability, 14-year-old with severe PTSD, unable to speak because of the sheer terror that he or she is in. A judge has to know mental health and developmental implications of evidence gathering. So that's, the kind of transdisciplinarity that we're looking at, other than the notion of working together, which is multidisciplinarity. So transdisciplinarity is how each of you needs to know how systems work and the possibility of working with these systems. But going ahead on this thesis, to look at child abuse, and I spoke about the inner voice as it applies to one mental health outcome, which unfortunately runs the risk of being fatal, which is suicide. But if you look at the internalization model, which is the processing of meaning, and you take the child's abuse experiences and the internalization of the behavior, you can't just be treating it, a child's behavior, because that's not trauma informed. And let me tell you why I'm saying this. Intrafamilial abuse, incest abuse with all its complexities and what it does in terms of messing with children's minds about boundary violations. कि सीमा क्या है पहचानना मुश्किल हो जाती है, अपने कौन है, how does a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old make sense? How does a 14-year-old make sense of a very close family member? But take the predicament of, let's say, a 14-year-old who is trafficked with the complicity of her family. Complicity of her family. ये अपहरण का केस नहीं है. This is not kidnapping and abduction. This is a family who is in a situation, if you look at the vulnerability factors that we presented, the whole ecological model of what circumstances a lot of these kids come from. So they sell to them. Now look at the psychology that plays out there itself before you look at the rest of the terrible story that transpires. Did I not have value for my parents? Do I have no value for my parents? That is my only value in the money that they got out of selling me? Or worse still, is my only value in the services that I was compelled to provide after I was trafficked, essentially to be sent into a brothel. And look at the arduous journey. तो कहीं आंध्रा से वो ट्रैफिक हुई, कर्नाटक से होते हुए कमाठीपुरा, मुंबई या पुणे या गोवा कहीं पहुंची, वो 10 दिन लगा, 14 दिन लगे. And if your police system, and these guys are ingenious, इनकी networks जो हैं, the trafficking network, they are so well organized that if your recovery and police and judicial systems are not equally well organized, it's a losing battle. और till she's in the brothel, इसको झूठ बोलना, भूखा रखना, मारना, सिगरेट से जलाना, बंदी रखना, ताला लगा के रखना, झूठा दिलासा देना, and then you induct her by basically subjecting her to brutal sexual assault till she loses any sense of resistance and resolve. And then 8 months till she's rescued to be providing services to 5 to 10 clients every day. And dig this, the ingenuity of the brothel owner and the pimp. They know what hormonal medication to give her so that she does not menstruate, so that there is no loss of income 4 days in a month. Now you imagine what a non-prescription medication does to the health of a 14-year-old. फिर पुलिस के रेड के बाद वो रेस्क्यू आती है, CWC ऑर्डर के बाद वो चिल्ड्रंस होम में है, गुमसुम है, रोती है, जिद करती है, खौफ है, अपने आप को काटती है, और फिर आप कहते हैं, आप नहीं, I'm saying the staff, बचा लिया ना, अब क्यों गुस्सा कर रही है, अब क्यों अपने आप को काट रही है? But if you do not understand what she has endured and experienced, you can't be, just be focusing on the behavior and saying कि रोना बंद कर या जिद करना बंद कर या अपने आप को काटना बंद कर, unless you get into this whole business of what the experience does in terms of internalization. And this differs in all abuse experiences or those by close people or extreme forms of abuse. And look at how this takes place. Abuse जो भी हो, हम जब physical abuse की हम बात करते हैं, and Preeti gave you all the examples, this business of hitting, cutting, bruising, burning, and but you hit. What is that? That experience is an experience of intrusion because it's body space, it's body integrity. उसकी internalization ये होती है कि I'm damaged, I'm powerless, and therefore the manifest consequences of self-cutting and hopelessness and aggressivity. So we cannot be telling a child stop being aggressive unless we address the internalization. And that's your entry point to really engage in a meaningful therapeutic interaction. If you look at sexual abuse by a close relative, जब हम देखते हैं कि ये mistrust जो होता है, शक्की बन जाते हैं, अनुमान इनके मन में रहता है, या रिश्तों में जो तनाव रहता है, they are unable. Why does all this take place? Because they have no sense of boundaries. They are not able to. It's all chaotic. So, if you look at the characteristics of what happens when abuse actually takes place, and the inner journey and these two parallel tracks, एक तो या तो वो आपके पास है, she is dissociating or he is dissociating, and a very nice trainee psychologist or someone is looking after the child and doing well, and और फिर 8 दिन के बाद पता लगता है कि she discloses, and then the psychologist asks कि पता है क्यों नहीं, तो she says आपने पूछा ही नहीं, मुझे क्या मालूम मैं क्या बताऊं, in fact people told me बताना मत किसी को. So how do we get into a position in our engagement with children that we look at the essence and structure of their lives. And it comes back ultimately, Jab, when Preeti was speaking about the various risk and protective factors और school और home environment की जब बात हो रही थी, I come back to the whole issue निर्भया कांड के बारे में. कोई ये पूछे कि 2015 में JJ Act क्यों चेंज हुआ, तो सब लोग कहते हैं निर्भया कांड की वजह से. With all we all feel very strongly about the safety of women. There is no doubt about that. But my submission to you, I think that the debate on the safety of women is a perverse debate because it's an incomplete debate. The debate has equally to be on the freedom of women. You have the right to go wherever you want, wearing whatever the hell you want. Nobody has the right to touch you. So this whole patriarchy, gynophobia, misogyny, heterosexist, homophobic culture is a pernicious culture. So, the education institutions, jahan se aap aate hain, how inclusive is the space for let's say for people who are LGBTQI, how inclusive and how open are we to these kind of discussions? JJ Act, सारी दुनिया बात कर रही थी भारत के बारे में, भैया JJ Act चेंज कर दिया 16 से 18 के बीच में हीन अपराध में जो किशोर अपराधी माने जाते हैं उनको सेक्शन 15 ऑफ द JJ Act के तहत प्रिलिमिनरी असेसमेंट करके एडल्ट क्रिमिनल जस्टिस सिस्टम में ट्रांसफर किया जा सकता है. We are against transfer. No child should be transferred because there is a proportionality issue. The seriousness of the offense versus the seriousness of the circumstances that this adolescent comes from. And there's enough provision in the JJ Act through principles of diversion in place of safety. सारी दुनिया में, we know from international literature that incarceration and retributive justice does not reduce criminality. वी शांताराम की पुरानी पिक्चर ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट जिन्होंने देखी है, 2 आंखें 12 हाथ, जेलर है वो, 6 कट्टर क्रिमिनल को ओपन जेल का वो बड़ा रेवोल्यूशनरी फिल्म था. And they of course that film. And they provoke him, and he ultimately dies. Or the last scene is when they look at the clouds and see his eyes. But the surprising thing, surprising because it's awesome in its horrible truth, the JJ Act was changed because a teacher hit a child. If this teacher had not hit the child, he would have never dropped out of school. He would have never come to Delhi. He would not have been involved in this episode. बाकी शोषण अत्याचार चलता रहेगा कि नहीं वो तो चलेगा, ये मानव जाति का डिफॉल्ट मोड है, हमेशा था, इतिहास में रहती. School, as Preeti pointed out, is the safest place for a child to be in, and the worst thing you can do to an ADHD child, a disruptive child, a badly behaved child, is to suspend him from school, because you're then ensuring that he's in the company of other school dropouts, and through peer pressure then gravitate towards that path of vulnerability that leads to experimentation with substance abuse and then stealing to support the substance abuse and then getting into intoxication, and then the whole story unfolds in that manner. और जब extreme होता है, and again, the framework that Preeti presented, and the reason that POCSO came into being, इसका भी एक इतिहास है, और वो कह के basically, that's the last thing I wanted to share for this session. There is an activist called Sheila Barse. She's filed many public interest litigations, one of which was the mentally ill under trial prisoners in West Bengal, to वो एक public interest litigation था. So she filed a public interest litigation in the infamous Freddie Peets case. Freddie Peets was a British national running a child institution in Goa, जहाँ से 3,000 तस्वीरें, अश्लील तस्वीरें उन्होंने जब्त की of children and him, in all kinds of pretty sick pictures that. And then he was jailed and there was an extradition issue. And finally he died in jail, but anyway there was a delay. She filed a public interest litigation and then she was running an organization in Mumbai called Neer Gaurav Foundation. She had an international conference on prevention of re-victimization and child protective trial procedures in child sexual abuse. This is pre-POCSO, and she said, how do you expect a child to depose in exact sequence all the details of what happened in the presence of the perpetrator and a hostile defense lawyer? Even the most resilient adult cannot, you and I cannot stand, this kind of experience in court. For any of you who've gone to court, I've gone several times as an expert witness, and it's very difficult to. और ये पढ़ाते नहीं, MD course में expert witness कैसे होना, ये पढ़ाते नहीं. How do you plan? How do you prepare? With what kind of prep do you go in? The other thing she said is, look at the limitations of IPC and why POCSO came into being. An 18-month child was handled digitally by the perpetrator, and the defense lawyer asked for acquittal under section 354, which is outraging of modesty in the prevailing IPC 354, saying what abstract notion of modesty does an 18-month-old child have, and does not satisfy criteria for section 376, which is penile penetration, because he used his fingers. And since it does not satisfy both the provisos in IPC, asked for an acquittal. Of course, better sense prevailed and he was found guilty, but you can see how limitations of law can obscure what is essentially a brutal act. And that's why POCSO came into being. And since I was part of the drafting committee of POCSO before 2012, when it was headed by Shanta Sinha, the first chairperson of the National Commission on Protection of Child Rights, she did a second term as well. So under her chair, we basically came up with this. So there's a whole range. And so child sexual abuse is not just penetrative assault. So there is non-contact and contact. In contact, there is non-genital and genital. In genital, there is non-penetrative and penetrative, and in penetrative, there is non-assaultative and assaultative. So there's a whole range. And it's important, these details are important, because the extent of punishment varies. And when a crime is compounded, tasveerein bhi dikhai, chhua bhi, they all compound as opposed to. That's why it's important. The idea is not कि 19 मार्च के 11:50 में क्या हुआ, उससे पहले जो भी चीजें हुई, all that is evidence, and I'm going to be sharing that with you in the next set of information that I'd like to present there. I'll stop with this and hand you over to the chairpersons to basically curate any of the things that you'd like to ask at this stage, and I'll be shifting to another gear in the next part of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
I know this journey is incomplete, and this discussion even by sir has raised many questions. There must be many questions. There must be many experiences also to be shared. I will invite the audience and participants. It's okay. I think I'm audible. I invite all the participants and delegates to raise your questions, share your experiences so that we can give some impetus to the work and objective. Please.
Can you just stand at your places, take the mic?
Hello, sir. Hello. Apologies if I'm going a little back on the topic, but while there's somewhat clarity,
Can you just introduce yourself?
so I am Tanya Kapoor and I am a psychologist. I work with neurodivergent population, both kids and adolescents. So while there's somewhat clarity on the case that you shared about, the trafficking, where the context of the family is somewhat assumed that even though the context is a negative one, the parents there were other ways that could have been handled. But what about cases where the context of the family is not as clear as in case of trafficking? So if I was to take a personal example, I was practicing and I was seeing this family where there was one neurotypical kid and there was one neurodivergent kid. And the mother asked that, where do I spend my finances? I have very limited finances, but do I spend them on the neurotypical kid where I can see their potential, or do I spend it on the neurodivergent kid where I know that I have to give some form of additional help, but I know that it may not reach as the level of the neurotypical. So as a clinician or as a person who has to interact with the family, what is our standpoint in that case? I'd like to know your thoughts.
These are essentially embedded in assessment processes. It's not about a 60-40, and so there is a difference between equality, equity, and justice. One of the just to give you an example, I may not be able to convey this visually, but please do have a look at, I'm not a social media person, but my Samvad team has forced me to get on Insta. My Insta profile is Child Shekhar. Shekhar spelled SHEKHKR. Please subscribe to it. Last time I was in a group like this, my Insta, I want to hit the 1,000 mark now. I'm on 951, so Child Shekhar. And go on to the place where the equality, equity, and justice idea is. So there is this fence, and there are 3 kids of different heights. And so equality is you give them sort of benches, and they're all the same height. So the tallest guy who was seeing anyway is seeing. The next shorter guy is able to see, but the shortest guy, even standing on that, is not able to see. But you're saying equally provide kiya na sabko. Equity is that you don't give the tallest guy anything because he can see anyway, and you give the next short guy a certain same height, but you give this guy a higher thing. That's equity. But justice is remove the damn fence here. Why do you want to give them that? So these are assessment processes, and I'd like to cap this very quickly by saying one of the problems with assessment, and I'll give you an example. Girl is trafficked for whatever reason. She's in a childcare institution doing well, going to school. CWC decides that family hai na, to bhej dete hain because of this assumption that if there is a family, that's the best place for a child to be. Excuse me, family is not always the best place for a child to be in. Families, on the one hand, and marriage, on the other hand, is some of the most overrated institutions. So you send her back, and she's re-trafficked because you have not done a social investigation report. और मैं ये दावे के साथ कह सकता हूँ, किसी भी CCI में जाइए आप, if you remove the child's name, all social investigation reports will read the same. How can that be possible? You've not gone deeply enough to make the assessment that you're talking about, to understand what equity means. So equality is not about treating people the same. Equality is about recognizing differences. And that's the important principle to keep in mind. Yeah, next. We'll come in that order and you will find it.
and currently I'm also teaching. I'm also an assistant professor. So, yeah. So I have two questions actually. That what is the legal and ethical framework in case of harm to self, or if there is some like suspicion of child abuse? So what is the framework for that? And in your experience of systematic framework, so will legalizing sex work decrease crime?
I think that we can sort of park the second question because there is a serious move from various agencies that have unionized or look at the rights-based approach to sex work, both in Sonargachi in Kolkata, Kamatipura in Mumbai. That it's a very major kind of, but it's a tricky issue because there is a demand sector and there is a supply sector, and I wonder sometimes whether women who are compelled to get into sex, quote compelled unquote to get into sex work, do so voluntarily with the idea that of a liberated approach to affirmative female sexuality. To say I'm in sex work because, you know, I dig sex a heck of a lot with as many people, so, you know, what's your problem? But that's usually not the case. It is a very, very exploitative industry, as we know. So let's not go there because it's a different debate. But the issue, there are two issues here. You know, when Preeti spoke about a child protection policy where schools are concerned, now what does this mean even in the context of psychology? That many voluntary counseling agencies have a policy to say that if a client comes to me and says, and the client is told in advance, if you're going to disclose to me that you have abused a child, then I'm compelled to report, and I'm telling you before you start therapy with me. That's my child protection policy then. The other policy I want to draw your attention to is this whole dilemma on mandatory reporting. And if a kid says, I'm telling you in confidence, my parents don't know, and I'm begging you don't tell them because you'll finish my family. Or they know and they say कि हमारे पास resources नहीं है, ये अमीर घराने का है जो भी हुआ, you know, आपने हमें इस झमेला में डाला तो हम अपने आप को खत्म कर लेंगे. So how do you position yourself there? Now mandatory reporting is a process. It is not as though किसी ने आपसे कहा और 10 सेकंड के अंदर आपको रिपोर्ट करना है. And mandatory reporting holds only for an event that occurred after 2012. So if someone has been abused in 2013, they can still report now, 10 years later. It doesn't matter if they were, you know, 12 in 2013 and they are whatever, 29 or 22 now. Right? I draw your attention to our recent paper in Asian Journal of Psychiatry on the processes of mandatory reporting. If you just put my name and Asian Journal of Psychiatry and mandatory reporting, you will have the guidelines. So it's a 7-step guideline of how do you understand their hesitancies and assist them in the reporting process. Yeah, next. I'll come to you, ma'am. I just finished those, and I'm also kind of conscious of the time. That
Good morning, sir. My name is Aradhana, and I'm a psychologist. I practice in Jodhpur. Pardon my ignorance about the law, because I haven't studied much about it, and I am curious. But why does it seem that most of the laws of protection are there to protect the perpetrator more than the victim?
Not POCSO. The IPC, let me explain this. See, there is a difference between the adversarial justice system and the inquisitorial justice system. I will be alluding that in part 2 of my presentation, so you have a better idea. But in POCSO, there is no onus on the child. The burden of proof is on the perpetrator. And POCSO also override other laws. Do you understand? It overrides other laws then. So it will apply primacy, it will have primacy over any other law if a case is registered under POCSO. Whereas in IPC, the burden of proof is on the victim, not in POCSO. There was a question there, and I'll come to you, and then I will hand it over to the chairpersons.
We started. I do not have questions. I would like to make 2 comments or maybe contribute. One would be when we talk about child mental health and preventing child abuse, I think one very important thing that comes here is not just parental awareness in terms of how their behavior impacts the child, but also specifically addressing parental mental health and especially the mother's mental health. We are still a society where, despite of what kind of educational status or socioeconomic status we come from, the main responsibility of emotionally keeping the family and the children together still falls on the mother. And many a times what happens is when you're in a joint family setup and keeping in mind the notions of patriarchy and misogyny and all of that, what happens is that a lot of anger that is displaced on the mother, maybe by the husband or the in-laws, all of that that is displaced onto the child because the mother does not understand how to go about the stress that has come upon her. Second, in the way that we've been socialized, children often believe that, okay, my parents love each other and they've gone ahead to expand their family by having me and maybe my sibling. But for children for whom this dream that my parents actually love each other breaks, and there is no direct violence on the child, but they see that their parents do not basically even respect each other, the kind of abuse that brings up on the child is something that really needs to be talked about.
And I think Preeti also, when she spoke about children witnessing violence, what it does in terms of as an experience is a point that comes to mind. Still final?
Yeah, I think we'll just take one more. Current 5 points here, 0 there.
Good morning, sir, and all of you. I'm working as a counselor in Government School of Chandigarh. And I also attended B and C part of training of your Samvad project. And when I was attending Samvad project C group, then in our school, there was lecture by State Legal Authority. And one of the girl of our school raised a question and told, "Ki I am the abuser." And people from Child Helpline came. But his father came next day and told us, "Ki I don't want to, why you have done this? I don't want ki in media name of my child will publish." And he also, उसने काफ़ी उनके पेरेंट्स ने हेल्पलाइन वालों की कोई मदद नहीं ली और फिर वो भी थक गए. तो इस केसेस में व्हाट कैन वी डू? और जो बच्ची है वो भी फिर बाद में मुकर गई. और बहुत होता है सर हमारे स्कूल्स में ना, लाइक बच्चे को विटनेस भी करा देते हैं फिर बाद में वो रिफ्यूज कर जाते हैं.
So there are 2 issues here. One is that there are media guidelines. Actually, they are embedded in the document of POCSO itself and in the guidelines that the child's identity cannot be revealed. And so there are media guidelines to be followed. There are many reasons about children turning hostile. Every year, the Supreme Court of India in December holds a consultation from the Juvenile Justice Committee of the Supreme Court. It was held this December in Delhi, and so we are invited because we execute a lot of this training for the judiciary. The Vidhi, which is an NGO, has done a research on POCSO judgments over the last 10 years, की pendency कितनी है वगैरह. And one of the major issues that came up was consenting adolescent relationships. And why are we criminalizing adolescent love? And of course they call it the Romeo and Juliet syndrome, and I said that is an erroneous name to give it. Don't forget that Romeo and Juliet committed suicide. So it's a very bad title to give, but we give apologies to Shakespeare. So this is the reason why many of the girls the girl is 16, guy is 17, different community, whatever, but they are genuinely in love, and they run away, first a missing person complaint, and then they are found a month later, so kidnapping and rape charge, and then he's put in the observation home, and she may succumb to family pressures or turn hostile. And very often, actually the girl may have pressurized, the guy would have said, यार इंतजार कर लेते हैं, यार 1 ही तो साल की बात है, मैं 18 का हो जाऊंगा, यार 2 साल वेट कर लेते हैं, मैं 19 को होगा, तू भी 18 की हो जाएगी, तो कोई चिंता की बात नहीं है. But then, so there are these kind of loopholes in the whole reasons of, and also the cumbersome nature of why, prolonged trials and so on. So Supreme Court now has given an instruction to set up more POCSO court to fast track some of these things. So the trials are. So you'd be surprised. Muzaffarpur mein, 22 girls. So there were 22 witnesses, and can you imagine 20 lawyers? And Saurabh Kulshrestha was the POCSO judge in Saket. He completed the whole trial process within 4 months, and the judgment came. August, it started by December. The judgment was there by Jan, the sentencing. So, so an understanding of the law and a deep reading of the law and some of these interstitials which are constituted by psychological dynamics of relationships and pressures are very important in how we assist. तो mandatory reporting में यही करते हैं कि संकोच है आपके मन में, वो व्यक्त कीजिए, उसको समझ के हमारी तरफ से जो भी स्पष्टीकरण करना हो हम करेंगे, so that we get in a position to. Yeah, it's a process. हम हमेशा मानते हैं कि आपके मंजूरी के बिना हम कोई भी कदम नहीं उठाएंगे, लेकिन your intention to report should be document. You must document that.
I think there will always be exceptions, so what we can do is wind up this session because we don't want to get late to the next one. Thank you, Dr. Seshadri. I think you'll be having more of him in a little while. Thank you.
I request the chairperson kindly felicitate the speaker. Dr. Shekhar sir kindly present the memento to Shekhar sir. I will request Dr. Shalini, please felicitate the chairperson, Shubham sir and Lalit Kumar sir.